Ghanaian authorities and the International Monetary Fund staff have reached a rudimentary agreement on economic policies and reforms to be supported by a new 3-year arrangement under the extended credit facility of about $3 billion US. Now, according to a statement published by the IMF on Tuesday, the reform program put forward by the West African country aims at restoring macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability while protecting the vulnerable and preserving financial stability. The staff-level agreement paves the way for the IMF's management and executive board to approve Ghana's extended credit facility and reform program request early next year. However, with the country's habit of turning to the lender of last resort around every 4 years since its independence, there are questions around whether this round of reforms will be deep enough to solve the country's structural economic issues. Now, joining us from Accra, Ghana's capital city, is Emmanuel Amoah Darquah, economist and partner at CCARD Global, and he will be unpacking the impact of this decision with us on Business Edge. It's nice to have you around, Emmanuel.
Thank you for having me.
Now that the IMF has agreed to a $3 billion, $3 billion credit facility for Ghana. Now, tell me, what do you think about this? Do you think that Ghana actually has the mettle, the courage, and of course the sincerity to carry out its reform plans? Because some people are thinking it's more about the credit facility than the actual reason for the credit facility in the first place. What's your take?
Yeah, thank you very much. I must say that this is one of the key matrices we have to, fulfill before we get the full program. This is a staff level agreement, and so per the IMF's engagement, you have to get a staff level agreement before it is presented to the management and board for final approval. So I think it's a step in the right direction for us to get a staff agreement, but there are things that we have to do, which critical of them is the debt restructuring before we get a full approval from the board and management of the IMF.
All right, so how do you think the stakeholders within the economy, the people, even investments and investors and other corporate organizations in Ghana are receiving this news?
Yeah, it's a good news because the government had applied in July of this year for a fund program, and so getting a staff level agreement before the year closes, I think is a good news. Investor confidence is gradually bouncing back, but more importantly, investors on the external side are sitting on edge to look at the kind of restructuring that will be meted on them going forward before the program is approved by the IMF board.
We need to understand something. Ghana's reform program is aimed at restoring macroeconomic stability, debt sustainability, while also protecting the vulnerable and, of course, preserving financial stability. Some people are saying that this credit facility would largely go into paying off debts. How plausibly true is that nuance?
Not really. The major thing that this extended credit facility is going to do is to support our balance of payments. Because of what has happened, especially on the external side, we've been facing macroeconomic instability. And so once the IMF comes in and once we're able to get access to this external funding, there will be some level of stability. Mind you that Ghana had hinted of floating Euro bonds in the early part of this year, but it was unsuccessful, largely because of the macroeconomic instability and also the downgrade by the three credit rating agencies. And so once the IMF comes in to support Ghana in terms of also making available some amount of money, there should be some level of stability going forward. And more importantly, building on the stability to get onto economic reform, and that is what's supposed to happen. Ghana has been doing this for the past 16 times, and this is our 17th program that we have gotten a staff level agreement. So the big question is, what is going to be different about this? But I must say that we should be able to build the envisaged macroeconomic stability to transform Ghana's economy, solve the perennial, problems of Ghana's economy, so that we will not return to the IMF in the next 4 years.
All right, Emmanuel, looking at the program, there are actually 6 key reform areas that Ghana would have to work on. Now, let me just mention 2 out of it. Number 1 has to do with preparing the program for post-COVID growth, and the second is that it must develop a medium-term macroeconomic framework. So what do you think these plans would actually include, and how do you think that Ghana will be able to deliver on them?
Yeah, beyond macroeconomic stability, I believe the government should be able to look at how best we can solve these challenges, as I have mentioned. The key one is revenue mobilization. Ghana, as a lower middle income country, our tax to GDP ratio is around 12%. But as a lower middle income country, we should be doing between 20 and 22%. At the same time, expenditure has been ballooning, and which leads to ballooning public debt as well. As I speak to you now, Ghana's public debt is in excess of 467 billion Ghana cedis. So how best can we resolve these perennial challenges? And I think we should be able to raise a lot of revenue domestically, but more importantly, to rationalize expenditure so that you'll be able to bring down your budget deficit and your public debt. Again, we should be able to build import substitution industry. Yeah, as a country, we have competitive advantage to produce a lot of things that we import into our country, i.e. rice, poultry, oil, and the list is endless. How can government, through policies like the One District, One Factory policy, be able to build import substitution industries and lead to export-led industrialization? And I think these are critical macroeconomic structural problems that we should be able to, resolve. Again, Ghana has a largely informal sector. So how do you formalize the economy? Through the use of digitalization. And I think government has been able to, do well in registering for national ID and then also digital addresses. But the next step is for us to build on that database to formalize Ghana's economy, to let a lot of people who are also earning, especially workers, to contribute their quota to building a strong economy.
All right. Well, Ghana, I'm even glad that you talked about the fact that Ghana needs to do what it needs to do in terms of revenue generation. And I'm also glad that you highlighted several areas that you think they can go about it. But then some economists are asking the question, how actionable, how plausible, and how realistic are these plans? Because Ghana's been told to prepare a debt sustainability analysis and, of course, a debt management program. And we are aware that Ghana's 2023 budget is anchored on increasing domestic revenue mobilization effort by 1.2 percentage points of GDP. So it's always good to have that laudable, incredible idea. But how actionable can this come to be when it comes to implementation?
Great. So in the 2023 budget, there are 2 key revenue measures that government has outlined. The first one is increasing VAT, that's the value added tax, from 12.5% to 15%, and also reducing the e-levy rate from 1.5% to 1%. If you look at the 2023 budget, government envisages to raise about 23 billion from VAT, from the 2022 figure of 15.4 billion. Again, for e-levy, government envisages to grow e-levy from the revenue from 611 million to 2.2 billion Ghana cedi in 2023. So these are the 2 critical measures that government has outlined in the 2023 budget. I must say that appropriation has not been passed yet, but the risk to this revenue measure is for Parliament to pass it as soon as possible. And I make this comment because of what happened last year. Last year, government rolled out the e-levy. At the time, the rate was 1.7%, 1.75%. And because opposition did not, buy into this e-levy, the revenue measure was not passed up until May. And so, which means that government, from a projected revenue of about 7 billion, had to reduce it to about 4 billion. And even as I speak to you now, the 2023 revised budget has a revenue projection of 611 million because the e-levy is not performing. So the risk is for Parliament especially to get the buy-in of opposition to pass these revenue measures so that it can kickstart implementation in January, so that government will be able to raise a lot of revenue.
All right, now before we wrap up now, I'm glad that you are mentioning the areas that you think Ghana can look into if it helps to make some positive moves and, of course, have some positive records in terms of its economy and the sector surrounding it. But then what is 2023 economic outlook looking at? How is it looking for Ghana?
It is dependent largely on the success and the approval of the IMF program. And as you mentioned in your introduction, the program has 5 key areas. Number 1 is macroeconomic stability. Number 2 is debt sustainability, protecting the vulnerable, preserving financial stability, and also building the foundation for strong and inclusive recovery. And so based on these 5 parameters that the program seeks to achieve, it is largely dependent on how soon government can get the program approved by the fund, the board of the IMF. And I must say that critical of them is the debt restructuring. As I speak to you now, the Trade Unions Congress, that is the mother body of all unions, have issued a statement to the Finance Ministry and saying that they are not going to get themselves involved in the domestic debt exchange program. And I think this is so crucial that government should be able to engage more, because if you want investors to go into a debt exchange program, you have to have deep conversations and consultations with them. And also on the external side, a government is having negotiations with the external creditors for some level of debt restructuring. So largely it depends on how successful and how quick government gets this debt restructuring done, so that the IMF staff can move the staff level agreement to the board for possible approval. In the statement that the IMF released yesterday, the passage of the program is largely dependent on sufficient assurances and progress made on debt restructuring. So to conclude, I must say that 2023 we will be able to enjoy some stability, but the stability is going to be anchored on the approval of the extended credit facility program that the IMF is going to grant Ghana, possibly the first quarter of 2023.
Okay, then we expect the outcome of the credit facility program. We'll see how Ghana will be able to run through with it. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.